Good morning and welcome to our session on criminal justice. Our speaker is Senator John Cavanaugh. He is the state senator from Legislative District 9. The district contains, if you're not familiar with the Omaha districts, much of the Midtown and East Central part of Omaha, includes many of Omaha's oldest neighborhoods, as well as many key institutions, including UNO and Creighton, the Nebraska Medicine Complex, and others. He's a graduate of the Catholic University of America. He got his BA there in 2003. He is also a graduate of the Vermont Law School, where he received his JD and an MA in environmental policy. He is married to Kathleen McGill. They have 4 children: Evelyn, Jack, Lucy, and William. Public service runs in the senator's family. His sisters, State Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, and his father, their grandfather, a couple of uncles, have all held or currently hold executive elected positions. He previously served as the Douglas County Assistant Public Defender. He's been a strong advocate for criminal justice reform, the environment, and social justice issues. His committee assignments this year include General Affairs, Natural Resources, Urban Affairs, and Legislature's Planning Committee. We are pleased to have you with us, Senator Cavanaugh.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks, Dave, who's a constituent. Were you originally a constituent, or did you get redistricted in? You're very close to the board. You always were.
The Sunshine.
The Sunshine District, so Dave is a constituent and has been gracious enough to invite me to events like this. And he correctly stated I was a public defender and for 7 years before I got to the legislature, and have a long history of family interest in politics. And a lot of people always think, did you get into politics because family relationships and things like that? And, I would say those relationships probably pushed me away from politics more towards it. But it was my service in the public defender's office that drove me to run for office. And it had to do with my frustration about how the criminal justice system works, or really doesn't work. And that, just sitting there watching the legislature debate criminal justice issues, and I felt where they were missing the mark in the conversation about what would make a difference for people in the system, and just having the misplaced value about what we are talking about. So I apologize, I didn't make a slideshow or anything. I'm not very good at computers anyway, but I'm more of a talker, I guess. In terms of things, I want to make sure, I don't know how many, if people have questions, if you want to we can have a dialogue, but I can talk for as long as you like about criminal justice issues. In terms of things that I've done in the legislature that I take sort of I'll give you the look behind the curtain of my perspective of how I approach criminal justice bills. So I look at a bill, and I generally have been opposed to any bill that's going to increase penalties or an amount of time somebody is incarcerated as a result of whatever conduct they engage in. And the reason for that is that I've never seen increased penalties work as a deterrent. And so we get into this situation where people look at criminal justice and they get angry. Of course they get angry. Whenever there's a crime, there's a victim. And so somebody gets hurt, somebody gets angry. But we have to look at it not from the perspective of vengeance, we need to look at it from the perspective of justice. And when we're talking about what purpose should it serve, more incarceration is not going to serve it serves the purpose of vengeance, potentially. It doesn't serve the purpose of rehabilitation. We know that from our current system. And it doesn't serve the purpose of deterrence. And so I look at those things and I say, well, let's try and find ways that we can have more just outcomes. We can decrease crime, through things like providing services. So if you look at my bills, you'll see that I've pushed for bills that have increased access to services. My priority bill last year was one that would allow or make sure that anybody coming out of our Department of Corrections institutions is signed up for Medicaid when they walk out the door. And this is a bill that is geared towards getting people, when they get, they come out of jail, so a lot of times they'll get a 30-day supply of their meds or something like that. If we can get them signed up for Medicaid when they walk out the door, they have a card in hand and they can go get their meds for the foreseeable future. And the problem we were running into was people would get signed up, they wouldn't do it accurately, and they would end up, you couldn't find them again because we don't do a good job of transitional housing. And so I focus on things along those lines, things that are going to be rehabilitative, things that are going to lift people up and help them after, and focuses on treating individuals as humans and not just as someone who has committed a crime. And that, obviously comes from, I don't know how much, we're in a church, want to talk about religion, but that perspective for me comes from my religious upbringing and my, I guess, social justice. I'm a social justice Catholic. Dave and I talked about that earlier. But there are a couple types of Catholics. I don't know. Anybody here Catholic? Okay, we got a few. But yeah, so I was raised as a social justice Catholic, which is kind of a unique type of Catholic, I guess, anymore. And so I focus on those sorts of things. And a lot of people, I think, try to paint that as, I don't know what you want to call it, weak, soft on crime is something that I get called a lot. And I think that we need more people who are interested in pursuing the right outcomes and finding what works, as opposed to people who are just looking for the easy answer, which is to posture and say what you think people want to hear, but not what's the right answer. I actually brought with me, I should have brought a copy of it, but I'm sure you saw the article in the paper about if we build a new prison, we're going to need to build another new prison. So we'd be 1,500 beds under capacity. And from a perspective of legislators, we need to look at that, I think, from two perspectives. One is we have a fiduciary obligation to the state of Nebraska to look at how much it's going to cost us to continue to house these people. And if we build another prison, we need to build another prison, we need to build another prison. And each one of them is going to cost more and more money to do that. And so we need to look at it from that perspective, of course. And that is something that a lot of maybe other senators are going to think about. But we also need to look at it from the perspective of those 1,500 people are our fellow Nebraskans. Those are people we're talking about who, based on the current state of policy, we expect to commit an offense that's going to have them end up in the state penitentiary. So you need to think of it that way, that those are people who are not yet in the penitentiary who are going to commit an offense and end up there. Those are 1,500 crimes, potentially more crimes, more victims that are going to happen. And that is under the current state of our policy in the state. If we make no changes, that is what's going to happen. And so we need to think about all of those human aspects of that, not just the money, but we need to think about how we can make changes that's going to prevent that. And some of those changes are ways to reduce recidivism, which recidivism is repeat offenses. So someone who has just gotten out of prison and then commits another offense within 3 years is how we calculate recidivism. And so my bill about Medicaid for everybody coming out is a bill directed at reducing recidivism. It's about making sure that we support people when they come back out and that they have health care so they can get their physical health taken care of, but also their mental health taken care of so they're less likely to commit a crime. Did you want to ask a question?
What's the number?
I'm sorry?
What's the number?
That bill? It was 921 that passed last year. So that bill's already passed. And that I can tell you, it doesn't go in effect until this June because we had Medicaid, the department had some problem with implementing it immediately. So we gave them a year to implement it, and we actually are going to have to hold them accountable on that to make sure they actually do implement it this summer. Yep.
I did have
Sure.
If the people coming out of jail start on Medicaid, then how will that affect the seniors that are on Medicare, Medicaid in Nebraska? Will that reduce?
So it shouldn't affect anybody because these are people who are already eligible for expanded Medicaid under Obamacare, essentially. But they already are eligible and could apply on their own. What it does is make sure that they fill out the application, get it processed and approved before they walk out the door, so they have the card in hand. So these are already, it didn't expand eligibility, it didn't do anything, it just streamlined the process under which a person who's incarcerated gets their application processed. Because what we were seeing was, these folks were all eligible, they're coming out of prison, they need these services, and they just were not positioned to actually access them.
And then my second question was in regard to people in jail because they've been pedophiles, convicted pedophiles, or sex traffickers. What do you do with them when they come out of jail?
When they come out of jail, well,
And how safe are our young people when they come out of jail, since there really is no cure for them?
right, well, so there's two, I mean, one, those carry heavy penalties, mandatory sentences for those offenses. Two, those folks would be on the sex offender registry, which is, a community-based supervision where you register and they have to keep up with all that information. And depending on which level of offense it is, you basically have to go and check in with law enforcement every 3 months, and there's a lot of that kind of stuff. Aside from that, that's when they're back out in the community. There is a thing that's called, it's a civil commitment. So if somebody finishes a criminal sentence in the penitentiary, they can be civilly committed to a mental institution for basically indefinitely, and then those people, there is a due process with that. You get a review, but that is not a criminal
There's a repeat offender that, there's.
Yeah, essentially, if the state thinks that they are such a risk from a mental health standpoint, that they need to be civilly committed, and that's existed for a long time, and the Supreme Court ruled about 10 years ago on that, saying that was not what you would call ex post facto, not punishing somebody again after the fact, and so it's an acceptable practice that is used to continue. I think it's not used a lot, but it is used in some instances.
You know, county jails are the front door to mass incarceration, and there's a lot of pretrial incarceration.
Yeah.
What can you do about that?
Oh, well, thanks for that question. That's one of my passion projects. I'm sorry? Oh, okay. Can you guys hear me? Am I talking to the microphone well enough? So county jails are the front door to the mass incarceration problem. And so what can we do about all the folks who are there pre-trial? So right now, Douglas County Corrections has somewhere about 1,000 folks there, and I'd say about 800 of them are there pre-trial. And so we have, in Nebraska, the Constitution says everyone has to be bailable, which means you have to be allowed to be released from jail unless you are held on a homicide or a sex assault. Those are the two things you can be held without bail. And so the question is, what is bailable? And so with about 900 people held pre-trial, 800 people held pre-trial, right now, as of about 2 weeks ago, I know this because I had a bill on this, there were 55 of those people were being held on misdemeanors, which means about 750 of them are on felonies. Pretrial release programs have been improved. I would tell you the misdemeanor population was about 120 a year ago, so Douglas County is at least doing a pretty good job of some pretrial release. And we have worked a lot to bolster those programs. And the problem you have is, obviously, you're innocent until proven guilty in the United States. You have the right of that presumption. And being detained before you've been determined, adjudicated guilty, means that you're being deprived of your liberty without a determination of guilt. However, we do have an interest as a state in preserving safety, public safety issue, and some people are a risk. And I've brought bills to try to focus the conversation on that risk and not on the monetary aspect. Because what ends up happening is dollars end up standing in place of safety. And so we set a bond, 50,000, 10%, which means you'd have to post $5,000. And somebody sits in jail on that. If you are, say you commit a domestic violence offense, that's your bond. If you're a wealthy person and you commit an act of domestic violence, you can post $5,000. If you're a poor person, you commit an act of domestic violence, you can't post that $5,000. The poor person might be less of a risk to reoffend or to assault or threaten their victim, which is kind of the concerns, than the rich person. But the rich person gets out because they have money. And so I think that's wrong. I think that we need to find a way to shift away from using dollars as the method for holding people. We need to have a more robust evaluation tool. We need to have other options for community placement, which they are doing in Douglas County, electronic monitoring, daily check-ins, and then for drug and alcohol offenses, they have what's called 24/7, which is alcohol monitoring, drug testing. You mean my bill about cash bail? That is a good question. I don't know the number of that bill. I'd have to check on it. I introduced 29 bills this year, and 13 of them went to the Judiciary Committee. So what my bill did, so I'll tell you this, the arc of that story is, I brought a bill my first year to eliminate cash bail and go to a system of risk assessment. And that went nowhere because it was too big of an idea. So the second year, I brought a bill that said, okay, you have to reevaluate their bond every 2 weeks. And they said, well, that will be too many court hearings. So I said, okay. So this year I brought a bill that says you have to reevaluate their bond every 3 weeks. And my point of that is to say, you've taken into account risk assessment, you've set a dollar amount bond, and you've taken into account ability to pay, which you're statutorily required to do to make someone bailable, meaning that they meet the constitutional requirement of ability to be released. Bailable means ability to be released. And so what I said is, if you're sitting there on $500, effectively you're not bailable, because if you had $500, you would pay it. So I said, let's just review that and have a judge look at that case and say, we still think that this person could post $500, that we've considered their ability to pay accurately. Because I think if you're willing to sit in jail for 3 weeks, that is evidence of the fact that you cannot pay that. Yeah.
I've read that people in jail on pretrial can lose a job or lose custody of children as quickly as 2 days.
Yeah, that's true.
So a 3-week review, somebody who can't afford the bail, so really needs the job,
Yeah.
has lost their job, potentially lost custody of their children. I'm sure you've seen the UCLA or ACLU study about cash bail. Yeah, I mean, can something more be done?
So I'll repeat for folks. If somebody is incarcerated, in as little as 3 days, you can lose your house, lose your job, lose your kids. I mean, you lose your kids immediately if you're not there and you got young kids. We should be doing more, is the question, is the answer. And I tell you, I'm trying. But I can't, so far, haven't been able to get even that done, even the 3-week review done, because there is such a fear about letting out somebody who's going to do something bad. And there are examples of situations where, I think there was one in the kind of Plymouth, Gage County, somewhere down there, Beatrice area, I'm trying to remember exactly where it was, Jefferson County, a couple years ago, issue of a domestic violence case where the assailant was a man, boyfriend of this woman, assaulted her, gets arrested, goes to jail, bonds out, and then goes and kills her, right? And so that's the nightmare scenario everybody's thinking about. You also have this scenario that was actually a pretty famous one out of Nebraska that President Trump talked about in his speech at the Republican convention, where a man was a DUI homicide. You know, a man was drunk and hit somebody and killed him, posted the bond, left the country. So President Trump talked about that, you know, and that became a national issue about that. And that judge in particular, after that hearing, I remember bonds on those types of cases got higher because judges were afraid about being made an example of. And unfortunately, our system is not perfect. You know, it relies on humans, it relies on judgment, it relies on a lot of these things, because the other option would be a one-size-fits-all. And there's these courtrooms in Douglas County, which is where I practice, hundreds of cases a day where bonds are getting set. And even with all of the human factors, pretrial scoring, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges all talking and arguing about this, it still doesn't get below surface level analysis of the individual, right? We don't actually get down to the who somebody is, what kind of real risk they're presenting. We're just trying to get it done as quickly as we can so that we can get to the next person. And so our criminal justice system is, in my opinion, too efficient. You know, we put a premium on efficiency. And it's because we have so many people that are in it. And there are obviously these types of cases that we're talking about. Those are the ones that need to go into the criminal justice system. The question is, are we bogging down our criminal justice system, the courts, the jails, the prisons, with people who should not be in them? And so are we devoting resources to those sorts of things that we should be devoting to the things that we really do need to do? And should we be focusing on putting those other people into another avenue? And we do that in a manner of speaking with diversion, but those still operate through the courts, through the prosecutors, and through public defender's office works on diversion as well. And then problem-solving courts. We have a young adult court in Douglas County now. We have a veterans court. We have a drug court. And I think those are the three in Douglas County. I know Sarpy County, or Lancaster County has a DUI court now. Sarpy County has a mental health court. And so we're doing all of these other methods, but those are still taking up court resources, and the reason we can't do more problem-solving courts is we don't have enough judges to do it. And so that is a problem. And I think that if we are serious about solving prison overcrowding, that's one of the reasons we talk about sentencing reform is a way to address all of these problems. And one example of that is that we've got a lot of pushback on is, decriminalization of marijuana would be one, where you take that out of the criminal justice system. But you can also take some of these felonies, offenses, possessory drug offenses, like a small amount of whatever, methamphetamine, we'll say, you can make that a misdemeanor. Then that takes that out of the district court and out of that level and puts it into county court, which is just a little bit, it is a very overburdened court, but it is not as time-consuming and resource-consuming generally as felony court. So we basically have to take it from every approach, right? We need to address it from resources, but we also have to address it from what we are deciding to put into the criminal justice system. Do you have another question?
Oh, I just had a question regarding marijuana. You take the criminal aspect out of using marijuana. Isn't that legalizing marijuana in the state of Nebraska?
Yes. There's a decriminalization bill that I heard this week, and I haven't read that one. So there was a medical marijuana and a decriminalization one.
Medical, I can understand.
Yeah. So if you legalize marijuana, like a lot of places have legalized recreational marijuana, and then you would treat it like a regulated substance like alcohol probably is how most Missouri, Illinois, Colorado have all done this. So yes, realistically, I think that is what you would do if you were to legalize marijuana. If we're talking about how you're going to do it, that's a question of implementation. The question is whether we should be incarcerating people in prisons for marijuana is kind of my point. and I don't think we should. I guess I think that's a misallocation of resources. Oh, did you have a question?
John, I'm concerned about juveniles in the pipeline of prison.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot better way to deal with kids when they first do an offense, other than it gets to the point where, it's really a serious offense, particularly when you look at most of the offenders, it's because of socioeconomic or other reasons, and a lot of them are drug related. I don't know, and prisons cost us a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people with mental illness in prison that really is not the best service for them. To be there is not really great. But I don't know what the legislature is looking at in terms of juvenile offenders, the pipeline of prison, and also all the people with mental illness in prison that sort of serves as a facility because we don't have the proper services for them. And, as we spend all that money on prisons, wouldn't it be a better use of our resources to really spend that money to help people with services?
Yeah, so I'll try to paraphrase for everybody. We have a problem with juveniles, basically the pipeline to prison. And how do we address that, and shouldn't we be putting more resources into the front end? And I agree with that 100%, and those are kind of the type of approaches that I've tried to pursue, is that we invest in people up front before they get into the prison system. The problem with selling that idea that we've had is people can wrap their mind around and say, this is the cost to, say, build a prison, $500 million to build a prison, and it'll house this X number of people. The problem you have with what we're talking about is that we need to invest in more mental health capacity, more services. Those come with a big price tag, but it is so hard to see those results, and those take time, right? And so from a just like sales perspective, it's been really hard to do that. Everybody, I think, understands in principle that concept, and I think they accept it. But up to this point, it's been very hard to get, I think, really invest at the level that we should be. And that means that is access to mental health care, that is quality education, that is safe, affordable, clean housing, that is food, all of those things. And we've had so much, when you try to expand SNAP benefits, or you try to change SNAP in some sort of way, that is a criminal justice reform bill. But a lot of people look at it as government handout or something along those lines. And they would rather not put another $1 million into SNAP and put $20–30 million into a prison instead. And that's just because people's perspective about the role of government and what, I guess, bang for your buck, they don't understand it. So yeah, I'm certainly, I agree with you on that. We are working on at least study right now to figure out mental health bed capacity, just to see how many we have out there between public, private entities. We have a real problem in Nebraska in terms of, we shut down the regional centers a long time ago, and we just have Lincoln and Douglas County is the biggest mental health provider. Douglas County Jail is the biggest mental health provider probably in the state, but certainly in Douglas County. And two, we are holding people there who are waiting to go to the regional center to get evaluated. And so we don't even have capacity to evaluate all of these people. And if you're talking about kids in the justice system, we can't get them a psych eval to figure out what type of treatment to get started on to help them. So there's all of those sorts of problems that we need to work on. But the other problem you have with that is not just a problem of investment. You could invest all you want. We don't have enough doctors to do these sorts of things. So we need to be working on how to get more doctors to come here, which maybe is an investment in our 2 medical schools that we have here to try to get, help them attract and retain more folks into those lines of profession. So it's like you gotta find, there's like all of these disparate parts that go into criminal justice that people don't necessarily think about, and they all are costing, they take resources, they maybe are delayed in terms of their effectiveness, but to really solve this problem, we need to do that and be patient. And politicians are not particularly patient, especially if you only run for office 2 times. You get elected to the legislature and then you run a second time. I mean, if we were to successfully implement a program like that, I can't run for reelection on its success, right? Anybody in the legislature, even a person who this is their first, this was day 30, 20, I don't know, we're somewhere in the 20s, I think. But some people have been there for 20-some days. Even if we passed it this week, I guarantee you they wouldn't see the fruits of those labors until after they're gone. And so politicians are short-sighted, I guess is the answer to that. But the other part of your question was about the pipeline. We need to stop criminalizing behavior. We're over-policing certain populations, over putting them into the system. And if you set foot in a courtroom, you're more likely to set foot in a courtroom again later than somebody who hasn't. You're more likely to, if you go to juvenile court, you're more likely to go to adult court and go to prison. And I think Creighton is working on a study on that, if they haven't already, that shows basically that connection, where people who are in the adult system, and you can see basically everybody there went through the juvenile system. Very few people in the adult system didn't go through the juvenile system. Oh.
Is your bill LB 553 provide for automatic review of bail and conditions of release?
Yep, that's that one. 553? Yeah. So that's my cash bail bill this year. I'm terrible at knowing any of my bill numbers. I apologize. You only remember them after you pass them into law, because then you have to fight about their implementation. So I don't know. I like the question and answer. I'd love to keep going. I mean,
Well, going on to the reforming the criminal justice system, I think it's like we have 5 million, or 5% of the global population, but we have 20% of the global population that's in prison.
yeah.
And so we really do have a problem. Now, I think federal funding for building prisons really was kind of like a hidden driver to build prisons. But with this administration, the federal administration, don't they offer some grants for preventive? I have read that, like the DOJ had offered some grants where to get through, to stop this pipeline and to do other things that are more preventive, to help with the abusive policing and things. And is that available to us?
Well, so in terms of the federal funding, I guess I couldn't speak to that necessarily. I mean, with Inflation Reduction Act, CARES Act, and the Infrastructure Act, there's a lot of federal money floating out there for a lot of things, and so that one I don't know. But ultimately, we built a lot of prisons in this country, and we over-incarcerate people. We're the most incarcerated country in the world, and Nebraska is one of the most incarcerating states in the country. So we're one of the worst offenders on that. And my perspective, and one of the reasons I've been opposed to building a new prison, is that we need to look at it from the perspective of, do we need to be incarcerating this many people? Not how do we incarcerate more people? It's, are we incarcerating the right number of people? Which I think the answer is obviously no, we're incarcerating too many people. So how do we find a way to incarcerate fewer people? What are the metrics? What's the decision-making process? And how do we set up systems to help the people who we have incarcerated, so when they get out, they don't reoffend? Because our prisons are not just full of first-time offenders. I mean, there's a lot of first-time offenders, but a lot of people come back. The money, to me, I guess it is important to talk about how much money there is for prisons and how easy it is to build them from that perspective. But I think it's more of a question of, why are we so desirous of building more prisons and incarcerating more people as opposed to solving the problem? And my thought is it's easy. It's just easier to continue doing what you've always done and incarcerate people.
How pervasive that is, that is adding up to it, because people won't know that, they'll be asked to do these
Yeah.
make this plea bargain, and then probably, if it went to the case with the court, they probably wouldn't have to, they would get a lighter sentence.
So I'll repeat that one. So about coercive plea bargains. That's a good question, and that goes to things like cash bail, right? If you're incarcerated, you're much more likely to take a deal than if you're out. If you are out working, living with your family, and not in jail, you are more likely to take the case to trial. The case is more likely to be dismissed, or you're more likely to get if you do enter a plea bargain, you're more likely to get one that results in not a term of incarceration, because they're less likely to take somebody off the street and send them to prison than they are to send them from the county jail to the prison. And so that's part of and that functions as a part of the coercion, is incarcerating people pre-trial. The systematic overcharging of offenses is another way to coerce plea bargains, and by which I mean we have a lot of offenses out there, and they go up and up in terms of penalty, and you can say this conduct checks the boxes for this offense, but it also checks the boxes for this offense. And if you don't plead to this one, we're going to charge you with this one, and you potentially are going to jail for 10 to 20 years as opposed to 5 years. And so that functions as a coercion as well, right? And I know you could look at it from the other perspective and say we're reducing all these charges too. But a lot of the time when we reduce a charge, the first thing they were charged with is probably not the right thing. There's also what we call the habitual criminal. I brought bills to address all of these things, by the way. I brought a bill to eliminate the use of the habitual criminal. But that's an offense that says if you were previously convicted of a felony for which you've done a year in prison, regardless of what this offense is, you will do a minimum of 10 years. And so that becomes very coercive on these lower level felonies, a class 4 felony which carries a maximum penalty of 2 years in prison. If you're convicted of a class 4 felony and the habitual criminal, you're going to do 10 years on something like a possession of one pill of Xanax or something like that that's not prescribed to you. And so things along those lines also function as a coercive to get people to plea. Now, we don't record data in a very good way. The courts don't record what offense was charged and what it was pled down to. We don't record how often the habitual criminal is threatened but not used. So we don't have actual data on any of that. But I can tell you personally, anecdotally, it happens all the time. We're not set up to collect it that way. The court system data collection, the courts just isn't, the system they use for case management is not a data collection system. So any data we do collect is really jerry-rigged, like they've built systems on top of it to collect it in a certain way. And so you'd have to basically go through every case file and look at them.
Couldn't there be a law, or would the law not pass to do the collecting of the data?
We could pass a law to collect data, and I pass a law to collect data on evictions, and I've spent the last year and a half fighting with the courts about how to collect that data, and they basically more or less still refuse to effectively collect the data that we have required them by law. And their argument is it'd be prohibitively expensive to find a way to collect that data. That is a conversation I'm having, though, about maybe it's time that we change our system entirely, not just, we don't pass a law that just requires one type of data collection. We buy a new computer system that is set up for both case management and data collection so that we can more easily collect data. And that's a conversation I would love to continue having. I've had it with the courts a little bit. They seem a little hesitant to make that change. But I think it's the system we use now is still, I don't know, like I said, I'm not a computer guy, but it's like a DOS prompt green screen like interface. It's still that system. So it's probably time to do that. And then if we did do that, we would maybe be able to collect some more of that data. But the data, is just one step. It's not going to solve the problem. It'll just tell us what the problem is.
So much. I just think people don't stop to think that it can happen to someone next to you, it can happen to you.
Yeah.
And justice, is this really what it is defined as a system that we have?
Yeah.
But thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
How can we hold the judiciary accountable for ability to pay bail?
Oh, gosh. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, we have judges that are retained, but they're always, I don't think I've ever seen anybody get less than 80% of the vote, other than Dave Lamphere was on the Supreme Court and he didn't get retained after the Supreme Court made the right decision, but an unpopular one about when the death penalty could be imposed. That was 1996, I think. But I mean, I think it's ultimately the judiciary. It's hard to hold them accountable, and that's kind of by design. We want them to be a little bit insulated from the whims of the public, I guess. But fundamentally, the problem is we're talking about unsympathetic people. The people we're talking about, if you want to go to a judge and say, you're locking up poor people, and they say, yeah, but they're criminals, and you say, well, they haven't been convicted yet, and they say, well, yeah, but we all know, right? I mean, that's how most people think about this, and it is very hard. And the person who is the victim of the crime is a much more sympathetic person, right? It's much easier to say, we were protecting society, we're protecting the victims, do you want these people in your neighborhood, and that kind of stuff. And so we need to just be more active we need people to come down and testify at the legislature. That would be fantastic. That's really the thing, is to come down and say, we're regular people, this matters to us. We care about this. It's important to us that our society is not using its powers, which is the court system and the criminal justice system and its power to incarcerate, to pursue unjust outcomes. And so that's always been my philosophy, is that when you do these things, you're doing it in my name, right? You're doing it for me. And so I have a responsibility to make sure that it's being done right and fairly, and that I bear some of the burden of that injustice when it is done. Most people don't see it that way. Most people are just like, yeah, but, right? So it's fighting an uphill battle, but it'd be nice to have more people come down and say the same thing.
Okay, another question regarding the case management and data management system. Could we get one that is not just for Nebraska, but nationwide?
Oh, in theory, yeah, if we got to that point, I think you'd do it like an RFP process. Yeah, I would say if we're going to buy a new system, and there's not a bill to do this right now. I've just been trying to encourage the judiciary to pursue that, and they've been hesitant. But if we were to buy a new system, you'd go out and look at what California is using, what Ohio is using, what Iowa is using, and find out who's got a good system that would meet our needs, and how much is that going to cost, and then you do cost-benefit analysis. That kind of. They might not be. It's something else. Cobalt. There's some. I don't know. I'm not a computer person. All right. One of you had a question.
What is your take on public versus private prisons, and what is the situation that look like in Nebraska?
I hate private prisons, and Nebraska doesn't have private prisons, but we do have private service providers for phone calls and emails and commissary and things like that. And I didn't bring this bill this year. I think Senator McKinney brought a bill along the lines of the bill that I wanted to bring, but I think that we should limit charging on those sorts of things. That there shouldn't be a profit motive for how we interact with folks in the prisons. The private prisons obviously is a perverse system, right? Where there's a private profit motive involved in terms of incarceration. But in Nebraska, private profit motive for phone calls and things like that, and it undermines the fundamental objective of prison, which is rehabilitation, right? And could circle back to, I only talked about the Medicaid thing, but circle back to things that we can do that are actually rehabilitative and address the legitimate interest of incarceration, which is rehabilitation, but also establishing connection, maintaining the connection with the community. So when you come back out, you still have family and friends and people to connect with, place to go, and people, those anchors that keep you in the non-criminal world, right? And so I think, I didn't bring this bill, like I said, but I still want to if we, in the future, giving people a minimum number of free phone calls a week, something along those lines. I just couldn't figure out how to do it yet. which then says, at least you can call your mom, your sister, your wife, your niece, nephew, your kids, a couple times a week, 15 minutes a week, whatever it is, to maintain those connections, to maintain your relationship on the outside so it doesn't degrade to such a point. Because when you're in prison and you got to pay for all of these things, you rely on somebody on the outside giving you money to do it. And then, you have money for whatever, snacks, food, shoes, entertainment, phone calls, all that stuff, and that's all dependent on people on the outside. It's basically your family and friends' charity. So yeah, there shouldn't be a profit motive for that because it undermines our objective. So the other thing I was going to talk about, connections to community, is the right to vote. We eliminate, we take away your right to vote when you're convicted of a felony until after you've finished your entire sentence, and then 2 years after that. We have two bills right now. Well, one bill and one constitutional amendment that would allow you automatically to get your right to vote after would be the bill, and the constitutional amendment would eliminate the taking away of your right to vote for people convicted of a felony, except for instances of treason and something else, I think. And the point of that is, again, voting is a fundamental connection to your community. It's a citizenship. It has to do with participation. People who are voting are generally going to be less likely to commit crimes and to act out against society. They're just more participatory. And so those sorts of things, that falls into the category of just vengefulness. We're being vengeful rather than actually addressing the interests of what we want our criminal justice system to do. And so those are two things. Oh, yeah.
Can you speak to the rehab process in Nebraska? What are some of the good things being done, and what are some of the things that are lacking?
So your question about rehabilitation in custody?
Yeah, in
Okay.
custody, what's going on that's positive, and what is lacking or not good?
Right. So the way things currently are in our Department of Corrections, we have programming that people are supposed to take, and that is evidence-based, types of things that can help people. And I've gone and visited some of these programs, and people who go through them, it's great. They have a changed perspective. They talk about, they take responsibility for their actions, and they really do seem like folks who, are gonna be successful if and when they get released. And historically, we front-loaded programming. You'd get in, you'd go and do programming, and then you say you're doing 10 years, and you got 3 years worth of programming to do. You do that at the front end, and then you kind of have nothing to do for the next 7 years, but you might do mentorship and help other people along. What we're doing right now is we're backloading programming, which means you sit for 7 years, and then when you're within 3 years of your release date, you start getting your programming. And that has partly to do, staffing. We have staffing problems. We have overcrowding problems. The pen does need, it's in bad shape. We have facility problems. So we have all of these problems from how we have run the prison. It all ultimately goes to, we are not investing enough in rehabilitation. We need to be making sure that we are paying enough that we can get people to run these programs. We did raise wages, and we got a lot of people to apply to be, are we running out of time, Dave? So yeah, I think the simple fix would be front load programming, and that would help a lot. Because once people go through those programs, then they live with whatever, they've gone through drug counseling, and then for 7 more years, they've lived with the lessons of that, as opposed to live for 7 years, and then get the lessons, and then go out in the world, and then have to do your first 7 years in the world without having that. So that would be a huge, I think, help in terms of reducing recidivism and helping people get the actual benefit that we want them to.
Administration?
Yeah, I think it is. We've tried to direct them, and they are not receptive to direction. And we're going the wrong way in terms of that. They're now making a move to try to eliminate the Office of the Inspector General, which is the legislature's oversight authority over the prisons. So be on the lookout for that. They're asking for an AG opinion about the Office of the Inspector General. But I'm going to run out of time, so I'll just close. I really appreciate everybody. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to my office. And if you're really interested in these things and interested in these changes, We have hundreds of bills that those of us who care about this bring to the legislature. I brought 13. Senator McKinney brought probably a dozen or so as well. Senator Wayne, Senator Hunt, the other Senator Cavanaugh. We need the community to reach out to their senators, to the legislature, submitting comment online. You can submit a comment on the legislature website. You can come testify. We need support from the community to help us move some of these ideas. And of course, we all have our opinions, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, I told you a lot of stuff that I think. I might be wrong about some of this. So I'd be happy to hear from you if you have suggestions about things that we could be doing better and improving our system. But thanks for your time and thanks for your interest in the topic. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator.